Well, South Africa has one of the highest rates of convicted criminals reoffending. A recent study has now called for the country to possibly re-examine its approach to rehabilitation in order to address this problem. Let's speak to criminologist Dr. Casper Lita, who's joining us now for more on this issue. A very good evening to you, Dr. Lita. Good to have your time tonight. So, in writing about this, in fact, I want to draw from what you said here, where you say the primary cause of reoffending in South Africa appears to be the state's unwillingness or inability to clear up areas of conflict in society which either breed criminality or fuel reoffending. Explain that to us in the simplest terms.
Yes. In conflict criminology, the idea has taken root that one of the reasons why reoffending takes place is because of government's inability to clear up preventable harm, such as inequality, which leads to huge amounts of violent crime, poverty, and unemployment, and also the stigmatization of ex-offenders. South Africa has a penal response to crime which is known as stigma. Not all countries have it. Many other countries, such as China and Japan and even African countries, believe that a warm but firm response is far superior to a harsh, stigmatizing response where offenders are rejected from the mainstream and their only way of surviving is actually to return to crime. Now, that is the situation we have in South Africa. It's a response called stigma to the problem of crime. And the problem with stigma is it's a life sentence. Whether you've been in prison for 2 years or 3 years, when you come out, it's a life sentence because you're ostracized, you can't find a job, you are literally relegated to a second-class citizen. And that is a breeding ground for reoffending, because there's just no other way for these guys to survive. And I would suggest that is probably the major cause of South Africa's unsustainable high rate of reoffending, which is probably one of the highest in the world as well.
Mm-hmm. And you've looked at what is being done in Finland, for example, with their offenders there, and you say there are strenuous efforts made, for example, to get offenders, once they're released, into employment, or at least avail employment opportunities, financial assistance, etc. But in South Africa, even people without a criminal record at the moment will tell you that they're in desperate need of work, they're in desperate need of some financial cushioning. So would that be a viable option for this country, given our socio-economic context?
I understand the problem, and obviously there are huge differences between Finland and South Africa. That was a huge challenge in terms of my methodology. But essentially what we are dealing with here is the management of cross-cultural learning. What can we learn from other cultures which could benefit us? And it's not just about money and jobs. The Finnish experience speaks very clearly to the fact that treating people with respect and dignity is a way to get them to toe the line and to rejoin society, mainstream society. Treating them like trash, as we do in South Africa, is a major driver of reoffending. So the point is, it's not just about money. It is how do we treat these people. The interesting thing about Finland is it's also a response to crime which is focused on stigma. Yet it has in very strong features of integrative of an integrative culture, as we find in China and Japan. And that is what interested me about the Finnish experience. As they say in China, nuance is everything. And that's exactly what we find in Finland. Although it's a stigmatizing, shaming culture, it has very strong integrative features. And that was my idea with my own PhD many years ago. I looked at the Chinese prison system, which is focused on integration, and I tried to see what South Africa, which is a culture focused on stigma, could learn from this prime culture. But the problem, sorry.
Please finish your points. Apologies.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, I tried to transplant some of our integrative ideas from the Chinese theater to South Africa, using ideas in the management of cross-cultural learning. So when I hit on the Finnish system, that's exactly what I found, what I was hoping to achieve in South Africa, if you understand the analogy.
And just on that point then, I mean, as you write in your piece, you say, in fact, about 9 out of 10 offenders in this country, in fact, commit crime again once they're on the outside. And one of the suggestions you were making earlier, for example, is creating an environment where inmates are treated fairly, with respect, etc. You say, for example, in Finland, there isn't barbed wire around the parameters of any said correctional center. I wonder how the profile of offenders there compares to ours in terms of sophistication, danger to society, perhaps even a propensity to try to break out, etc., which is not uncommon in South Africa?
I grant you those objections, but the point is, we are all people, and especially with the transition from a apartheid society into a post-apartheid society. I think that realization should be front and center in our thinking. Yes, it is true that many offenders are violent in this country, but the reason for that, as I pointed out, is located in the fact that South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world. And as Stiglitz, the famous economist who won the Nobel Prize some years ago, said in his book, The Divide, inequality is a choice. It's a political choice. Many of the reasons why we have such huge crime rate is because of unwillingness or vested interests in our government, unfortunately. And it's important to be critical of the government's marginalization and stigmatization practices, because these fuel crime and reoffending.
And just on that, I'd like to get your thoughts on what is often, I'm sure you've heard it as well, a throwaway comment in this country that you hear sometimes is people who then say, well, in this country, in fact, people who are incarcerated have more rights than those on the outside. To what extent is that a reality? And I wonder how much it ties in with the negative experiences that people who are eventually released from correctional services, either at the end of their sentence or for parole, are then mistreated, perhaps, and as you were saying, then fueling their likelihood to commit either the same crime or a different sort of crime.
Precisely because they can't survive in our harsh, stigmatizing, shaming culture. Not because they don't want to rehabilitate or they want to rejoin society. In fact, the evidence is that most offenders, especially first-time offenders, are desperate to rejoin society. I think people who talk about offenders who have more rights than the people on the outside are ignorant. And they haven't been to prison, because prison is not a nice experience. It's a horrible experience. And in fact, there is a strong sub-discipline in criminology which is known as the effects of imprisonment. And it is clear from the evidence gathered there that if you've been to prison, you are mocked. You invariably have psychological scars, if not bodily scars. People who talk like that have no idea what they talk about. And in fact, they create what is known as systematic communicative distortions in this conversation, which is a term which a German philosopher Jürgen Habermas coined. People who talk like that makes no sensible contribution to the conversation, unfortunately.
Dr. Casper.
Yes.
Dr. Casper Lita, good to speak to you. We'll hopefully be able to have you on for more of these conversations in future. For tonight, though, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much, sir.